This was my original tier list going back a couple of weeks now, and this was very much a preliminary ranking. This was, I think, if memory serves, still back when you could only do heroics on beta and Mythic Plus wasn't available. So as we're moving into pre-patch, and I'm probably not going to be playing beta as much, I wanted to give it a quick update. I also wanted to give a shout out to Growl. I had people telling me that he was covering one of my videos on his stream, and I went back and watched the VOD, and it was really enjoyable actually to see the discussion that was going on and hear his insights and perspectives and feedback and stuff. So huge thank you for that. I also figured I could use this video as a very quick way to clean up a couple of things from my previous videos. And first of all, that is going to be that I want to say that everyone who watches my content should take everything I say with an enormous grain of salt. Like Growl mentioned, I'm not doing like high level content or anything. So a lot of the time, what I'm doing doesn't require big throughput cooldowns to keep the group alive, or, you know, people just won't die unless they're failing mechanics. So my thoughts around healers don't revolve around the same sort of things as like the big pumper elite level players do. I also wanted to say that going back and looking at different videos, I should have done a better job of prefacing my content with the stage of beta that it was at, because going back and looking at different videos, it seems like a lot of my opinions or advice is a little contradictory because they were done over different weeks in different stages of beta and healer balance and tuning and bug fixes and things like that. So it even for me, it's a little confusing going back and hearing myself say that this healer feels excellent because it does fantastic throughput, and then go to another video and a different healer I basically say the same thing about. And as a tangent to that, I also want to apologize for throwing around the kind of S tier ranking way too much. I've been using S tier as more of a this healer has no major issues kind of ranking, rather than this healer will be part of the meta key pushing ranking, if that makes sense. I also wanted to say, don't read too much into the talent builds I was playing. Like, you know, I did have footage where I was playing a caster Mistweaver, trying to see how much damage Zen Pulse does, and how much mana I spend just doing regular healing. Oftentimes I was just testing non-meta talents or recently buffed talents like Earth Living Weapon or Zen Pulse or Barrier of Faith, rather than playing around talents that brought the most throughput or DPS, and that just happened to be footage I had. Because it can be quite difficult to summarize my thoughts on a spec over the course of, you know, 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever keys, and then kind of pick a 2-minute clip that fits what I'm talking about, because usually it doesn't fit what I'm talking about. It might make sense to me that watching a clip of a caster Mistweaver doing 0 damage and burning through half a mana bar in like the first 3 or 4 pulls of a dungeon is a good way of, like, it makes sense to me that that's why fist weaving is so good, is because it does damage, it doesn't spend mana and all those kind of things. But yeah, just don't read too much into the clips. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to shy away from the S tier or even like the S plus meme Mistweaver tier. And that's largely because over the course of beta, from going from healing just heroics with, you know, a lot of UI issues and talents just simply not working and things like that, as the beta has progressed and we've been able to test some Mythic Plus, and it feels like a lot of the healing tuning is roughly done. I want to say that it seems like Blizzard are kind of happy with how things are at the moment, and they're probably going to do one more final pass just before Mythic Raid or Heroic Raid or whatever opens. And the overall consensus I have from the last couple of weeks of beta is that it might look like there's a large degree of variance between all of these specs in this list, especially when you look at something like Presto Druid being S tier and Preservation being D tier. There is really not a big difference between all of these healers. I just kind of thought the horse meme would be funny. And I know that everyone goes through their S, A, B, C, D, E tiers for tier list ranking. So I kind of just combined the two. It's not a very good technical representation of where I think the specs are. But like I said, the overall consensus from my time in beta has been that all of these specs actually feel closer together than probably ever before. I've been playing WoW since vanilla, I've been healing since the start of Burning Crusade. I have played every healer throughout the years in a lot of different content. And I would say at the moment, going into Dragonflight, at least for myself, I have never ever struggled with picking a single healer to play more than I do now. And I've never wanted to play as many healers at the same time as I do now in Dragonflight. I'm looking at leveling a main and then probably leveling 3 or 4 at least other healers, just because I want to play them all. It really does feel like, at least for the average healer, Dragonflight is all about playstyle. Pick the healer that you find fun, because they are all quite viable. They all have good throughput. I don't think any of them are going to have any problems whatsoever with healing, especially like the normal kind of 15, even up to 20 content. I just don't see any healer really struggling. That being said, tier lists for the average player and tier lists for the tippity top of the mountain elite Mythic Plus pusher people, it's going to be very different. I think the average player cares more about throughput, on-demand throughput especially, and like reactionary healing, being able to make up for your sloppy play or your party's sloppy play, or being able to babysit a tank that's taking way more damage than they should be, or something like that. And for this reason, I would probably put, we're gonna stay away from S tier for now, but I would put for the average player or pugger, I'll put Resto Druid, Holy Priest, and probably Disciplined Priest, like right up there. Because like I said, they have good reactionary healing. They don't have any major glaring issues. They can all contribute damage while still being able to like save someone from standing in the fire or not pressing a defensive during party-wide damage phases and things like that. Now, I would also say that the remaining healers can probably all do that as well, just not quite as well as the top 3. Something like Preservation, I feel like ticks all of the same boxes as these top 3 for the average player, but Preservation is going to struggle in content where your group has bad positioning, because then you have bad positioning. Or if you're like, even, okay, as an example, if you're an elite level high pusher and you get to tailor make your group around exactly what you want to take, then Preservation is going to be fine, because and your party's going to be like in Discord or in comms or something, and they're all going to be stacked together and they're all going to be playing as a cohesive unit. Whereas if you go into a pug and you play Preservation, the 30-yard range limitation might be really punishing for you. You might get into a pug group with a warlock and a mage who both stand 40 yards away from each other, and you're just struggling. So for that reason, I would put Preservation slightly behind the other 2. And in reality, or the other 3, in reality, it's probably more like this, like very, very close. Like mobility or like range limitations is the only real factor I could look at for Preservation maybe struggling. Now that I think about it, I mean, even Mistweaver could probably go in this group as well. And so could Holy Paladin. Like I said, I know it seems a little bit like a cop-out, but I mean, like I said, there just isn't that much difference between a lot of these healers anymore. Shaman's probably back here because your damage can be quite low. You also lack a like tank external. I know this can seem like a bit of a cop-out, like I'm just putting everything in the same tier, but for the, I guess I want to stress this now, especially after watching Growl's VOD, is that for the average player, the largest difference between the performance of these healers is going to be your play, not specifically what the healer brings. As far as the tippity top of the mountain guys go, the part of the healing toolkit that matters a lot for the average player or in the average groups doesn't apply to those players. So if I'm looking at these healers and like, I'm basically looking at their healing toolkits primarily above anything else. Whereas for the tippity top guys, the healing toolkit or their throughput is what matters the least. The only thing that's really going to matter for those guys is utility, select utility, and damage. Damage probably more than anything else. And for that, Preservation probably gets bumped up a bit. And for that, I guess we can look at the potential S tiers. And that would probably be Preservation because its damage can be quite good. It's also not reliant on a whole lot of globals or DPS time. Kind of just press your Fire Breath and then your Living Flame to cleave enemies after that. And then you just spam Azure Strike, I guess, on packs for maximum damage, but most of your damage is going to be the 30-second cooldown on Fire Breath. Holy Paladin can also pump quite high damage at the moment, but this is entirely reliant on your group taking as little damage as possible, so that you can spend all of your holy power on Shield of the Righteous. As far as utility goes, this is again something that's quite different depending on what type of player you are. So something like Holy Paladin having battle res can seem like really good utility for the average player, especially like the pug groups and stuff, because you might bring a battle res and you might have the only battle res in your group. Whereas if you're playing at an elite level, all of those guys all take engineering as their profession for the engineering battle res. Now, I would say the average player, it probably isn't going to base their profession choice solely on their Mythic Plus utility or how much value their profession brings to Mythic Plus or their team. So something like Holy Paladin Battle Res could be very useful for average players, but ignored or not considered to be that strong for elite level players. And instead, maybe the immunity the Holy Paladin brings becomes a huge part of why they're sought after in the highest keys. I would say for the average player as well, Shaman damage becomes less of a weakness because, I mean, contributing damage is great, but the difference between a Shaman contributing damage and a Resto Druid contributing damage might only be 10% or something, but Shaman utility is huge because, again, if you're playing in an average pug or something, or your weekly 20 no lever or whatever it's going to be, maybe you put a group together with guildies that doesn't have an AoE stun in it. Now, elite level players are never going to push keys without AoE stuns, but maybe Shaman is quite useful because then you can talent into double cap totem stun, right? Or your group doesn't have poison dispels, but Shamans can talent into a very strong poison dispel totem. Whereas the elite level groups, they're building their groups around hybrids that press their dispel often. As far as what I'm going to level first, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be playing Holy Paladin. I just like the playstyle a lot, and it's a healer I haven't played for a couple of years, so it's a bit of a breeze of fresh air at the moment for me, so I'm really enjoying that. I've also, for the past couple of years, basically just been playing Discipline and Mistweaver, so I'll be leveling those up pretty quickly again. Probably also Preservation just because it's new. Like I said, there's a lot of healers I want to play. And again, take all of this with a huge grain of salt. I think all healers are pretty close to one another at the moment. I guess to rehash, the elite level players are worried more about how damage is going to pan out. At the moment, Holy Priest single target damage is the highest of any healer. AoE damage, probably Preservation, like I said, along with Holy Paladin, if they can effectively spend all of their holy power on Shield of the Righteous. Mistweaver overall is actually quite good. His single target is a little bit low, but effectively being able to run into every pack and just spam Spinning Crane Kick non-stop is obviously like quite a bit of damage. Discipline and Resto Shaman probably have the lowest damage at the moment. I mean, Discipline isn't that far behind Holy, to be fair, but if you're gonna pick a healing spec that's based like the same class, right? If everyone who has a fully like leveled up, geared out, completely ready to go Holy Priest is also going to be the person that has a geared out and ready to go Discipline Priest. So even one of those specs being ever so slightly behind on DPS compared to the other is just going to mean that every elite level group is always going to pick the one that does the most damage, especially when their utility remains effectively the same amongst their class. Resto Druid, I'm not too sure about damage. I've heard good things, but I haven't been able to push any kind of reasonable large numbers myself, mostly because I don't really enjoy swapping into cat form all the time. And usually I don't get to play with groups that allow me to spend 10 or 20 seconds or even a whole pool of just doing pure damage. Most of the time I'm healing myself because I'm standing in shit I shouldn't be, or I'm keeping the tank alive who's taking more damage than they should be, or getting ready for the DPS to stand in fire or not clear their thundering debuffs or whatever, right? Like in beta, more than anything, what Growl mentioned a couple of times was the difference in playing with different like people, right? Like he can just like do a key with Dorky and he never has to worry about the tank dying. So I'm sure he can just pick any healer and just spend 90% of his time playing a DPS rotation. Most of the time people don't really have that kind of option for the average player, especially in beta when people are learning a lot of the new mechanics and trying out different builds. And like even in my case, right, I didn't spend a lot of time in beta fixing my UI. And I had, even today, like all the way up to basically the end of me playing beta, I had targeting issues, self-targeting issues. I couldn't bind, or I could bind the report bug button, but then every now and then it would just unbind itself and spam me with errors. So beta in itself is a bit of a mess. And in that kind of environment, the healers that are reliant on a lot of globals to do damage feel like they do less damage than the other healers that can do all their damage in, you know, a couple of globals every 30 seconds. But we'll have to see how that plays out, I guess, in Dragonflight as people get more accustomed to the content. Just wanted to say thanks to everyone for watching and for the feedback and stuff, and hopefully this, I really want this meme tier list to take off. But yeah, algorithm stuff. Thanks.